Want to make those faint nebula pop in your astrophotos, even if you're shooting from the city? The secret is in your camera's histogram, and today I'm going to show you exactly how to use it in the field to get the best possible shot. No fancy gear or post-processing tricks needed. Stick around because in the next few minutes you'll learn a simple but powerful trick that beginners often miss, and it can transform your night sky photo. First, before we get started, what is the histogram exactly? It's a graph on your camera's screen that shows the brightness distribution of your image. Shadows on the left and highlights on the right. For astrophotography, especially when you're photographing nebulae, this graph is your best friend. It tells you if you're capturing enough light from those faint clouds of gas and dust. Now, there is a very common misconception about how to use the histogram when you're taking astrophotography images. You might have heard, like in fact I did when I started out in astrophotography, I also heard that your histogram should be about a third or a quarter in from the left. That's great advice for daytime photos, but for night sky shots, it's actually holding you back. Why? Because nebulae are super faint. If your histogram is stuck on the left, you're underexposing, not capturing enough light. When you brighten the image later, you'll just be amplifying noise, not the nebula. The trick that I've mentioned in the title of this video is called expose to the right, or ETTR. It means pushing your histogram further to the right without clipping the highlights. Clipping means losing detail in the brightest parts, like stars turning pure white with no color or texture. But if you get it right, you're capturing the maximum light from those faint nebulae, which means less noise and more detail. Now, how to use your camera settings to get the perfect exposure in the field. The first thing you need to look at is ISO. Start at around 1600. Higher ISO will brighten your image and shift the histogram to the right, but if you go too far, it'll add too much noise. You need to find your camera's sweet spot. Every camera is different. For example, for my camera, the sweet spot is around ISO 800, but yours could be quite different. So do experiment. The second thing that you need to adjust to get your histogram in the right position is your shutter speed. Use the longest exposure time that you can without star trails. In order to calculate this, you can use the 500 rule, which means that you need to take 500, you divide it by your lens's focal length. Mine was 135 millimeters, for example. This should give you the number of seconds that you can expose before star trailing happens. And I generally find that when I calculate this, I normally need to go a bit lower than the number that I've actually calculated. Last night in the field, I had to go down to 4 seconds, even though the calculation showed 5 seconds. Let me show you how the histogram changes as we adjust camera settings. What you see here is the view on my camera's screen after I make each change. First, with an ISO of 800, I tried 2 seconds and 4 seconds. And you can see that the image becomes brighter and the histogram moves away from the left edge. That's good. Next, I tried 1600 ISO and kept the same exposure time of 4 seconds. The image is brighter and the histogram moves to the right again. I then tried 6 seconds and this moved the histogram once more. As we said though, if your stars are trailing, you'll have to drop the exposure time. But if not, you can increase it again. Finally, you can see what happens when it goes from 6 seconds to 8 seconds at an ISO of 3200. Now the histogram is looking better. but do check your images to find the best settings for your camera and make sure you do not have too much noise in your image and that you do not have star trails. And if you do have any questions about this, please drop a comment below and I'll answer you as soon as I can. The next setting you need to look at is aperture, and use the widest aperture that your lens will allow, such as, for example, f2.8 or f4, to gather the most light. You can use the camera's live view to check the exposure level in real time, but I actually think the most practical thing to do is to use the histogram display that you can see on the LCD screen of your camera. By adjusting the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture, we can move the histogram peak, take a number of test shots, and see how this moves the histogram. When you're happy, you can go ahead and take your main images. Now, here are some quick tips for beginners. Make sure when you're imaging that you shoot in RAW to keep all the data for editing later. When you do come to process your images, and if you have RAW files, you can stack those together and you'll not lose any of the data. If you convert anything to JPEGs, you'll be losing data. Make sure that you manually focus on a bright star using live view before you start imaging, so you can get everything in focus and your stars should be really sharp. Make sure that you use a remote shutter or time delay to avoid camera shake. Never use the button on your camera. That's not a good idea. Make sure that you take many exposures, perhaps even hundreds, to stack later. This will reduce noise, bring out the nebula details, and make for a much better image. With this histogram trick, you'll be capturing nebula that really stand out, even if you're in a city. So get out there, experiment with your settings, and watch your astrophotos transform. If you found this video helpful, please hit like and make sure you subscribe for more astrophotography tips from Astroimagery. Got any questions? Please drop them in the comments. I love helping you shoot the stars, and I do reply to all the comments as soon as I can. See you in the next one.